Hello, Reginald. Thank you for being part of my podcast about the stand-up comedy.
hmm
Um, so, for presenting you, you're an American and you live in Austria, in Europe. So that's a bit weird. I don't know, the European dream or something. When have you left the US?
I left the U.S. the first time in 2013, I think. 2000, yeah, spring of 2013. I did a study abroad because my school I lived in St. Louis in the States, and my school owned a school in Vienna. So I came here for a study abroad. It was my last semester of university, and while I was here, I applied for a master's program. Came back in January 2014.
It's what that's in the study in musicology. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
my bachelor, when I was in the States, I was studying classical guitar. When I came
Okay.
back, I studied musicology because it was the easiest thing to get accepted for.
And why did you go to Europe to do that? For the interest of the school or?
No, not at all. I just didn't want to live in the States. And
Okay.
I had an ex-girlfriend while I was living in the States who was German, and she was like, "Why don't you go to Europe for your master's?" And I was like, "I'm not getting a master's degree." And she said, "Why?" And part of the reason was because a master's degree in music is absolutely worthless unless you want to be a teacher. But the easiest excuse I could give her was to say, "Oh, yeah, it's too expensive." And she's like, "It's free." And I was like, "Well, that's a good argument." So I guess that's the
Yeah.
easiest way to get the visa.
hmm And from what is your passion for comedy come from? When did you know you want to do that to make laugh people?
I don't know. It's hard to say because I've had people tell me when I was younger that I should be a comedian. And I never really thought too much of it, mostly because I didn't really feel like I needed the validation from strangers. But
Mm.
when I was 21, I was in college and I listened to I was put it this way, I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and at that point, I started listening to more podcasts with comedians in them, and they would talk
Mhm.
about like their philosophies on stuff,
Mhm.
and they'd be like, "Yeah, so we as comedians," and I'd be like, "Yeah, us," even though I've never done this before, but I just like
Mm.
fell in line with a lot of their ideology, which now that I'm 30 and I look back at it having done this for a while, I think a lot of what they were saying was toxic bullshit that like was just like, yeah, that's what we have to do. We have to call people bad words and always be offensive and not take people's feelings into consideration because we're comedians. Uh, wh- but I identified with it a lot then, but again, I just didn't feel like I needed it from the audience. However, I did notice that around that time, if I had a funny story that I would tell a friend, I would memorize how I told the story to one friend and then tell it to another friend later on.
Mhm.
And like I'd always kind of make this story better each
Better, yeah.
time, which is
Mhm.
something that, a comedian has to do. So I was kind of doing that, but on a one-on-one basis rather than being on stage for a while. Um,
And did you make a school for comedian or just you go on stage and
you just go on stage.
okay,
Uh,
okay. And when did you start to do that to go on stage and make comedy?
I tried it a few times because one of my friends in Vienna was like, "Hey, you should go to this open mic and give it a try."
Mm.
And he kind of had to talk me into it because I just didn't really care. And I tried it once, and I did like fine for a first night. And I thought I did well for a first time. Who knows? The video's not there, fortunately.
Mm.
But
Mm.
I just didn't feel like I needed it enough. I didn't like how the validation of like people laughing in order for me to feel like I was funny, I didn't feel like I needed. Uh, Once I eventually started doing it on a regular basis, I quickly needed it, and it quickly became a thing where it's like, oh yeah, and suddenly my self-worth is tied to whether or not this audience laughed tonight. But before then it wasn't, so I didn't try it again for like a year because I knew how much work would go into it. Well, I had an idea of how much work would go into it. It was more than I would have thought, but I thought it'd be a lot. And so I didn't do it for another year, and then I was trying to like self-publish a book that I'd just written, and I thought in my brilliant young mind thought, okay, the best way to self-publish the book would be to get a bigger online following. How can I do that? I can go to open mics, and that'll force me to be social, and I can direct people to my Facebook page, and then that's how you self-publish a book, idiot. And I did that like 3 times, and when I was doing that, I was just kind of like writing all day and then thinking of a quick story that I wanted to tell on stage so I could try to
Mm.
socialize afterwards. And by the third time doing that, I was like, oh, this is what I'd rather be doing instead. And then I decided, my next show, I'm doing this with that being my main pursuit. And the next show was on April 1st, 2016. So 5 years ago in a
Okay.
week. Yeah.
I see that you turn around Europe alone with your show, and how what's the process to you participate at some open mics, and then I mean there's got to be something between those steps. I don't know if you see what I mean,
Yeah.
because yeah, okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
my English is so bad.
Totally
Sorry.
fine. If we were having this conversation in French, I'd be saying "oui" to every question you ask. So, uh, yeah, I'm I'm always a weird example whenever we talk about this from my own path, and I always want to warn that, like, don't look at me for the expectation of what a timeline should be, because it was
Mhm.
much faster than most people's, and I would say much faster than I deserve in some respects. I
Mm.
just got really lucky with some things, and I happened to also be like good enough at writing something and developing an act that it was good enough soon enough. But basically, because there's no infrastructure for English comedy in Austria, I had to start making most of it. When I first started,
Okay.
there was one open mic that was only English, only comedy in the whole city, and that happened once every 3 to 6 weeks. And I was like, but I'll go to everything. So then there were like two shows that happened uh, a couple times a month that were all comedy, but it could be either language, and that made it almost all German, but they would let you do it in English. And then there were a handful of shows that they would let you do whatever you wanted, but it was almost all musicians, and they would just let you come up and do comedy if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Those were always the hardest rooms because nobody wanted comedy. The only time people were talking is when they were tuning their guitars, so people would kind of check out, and then
Yeah.
when you get on stage and you start talking, people just start talking to each other, waiting for the guitar to start. And when the guitar hasn't
Okay.
started yet, 3 minutes into your set, they turn around and they're like, "Why hasn't he started playing music yet? Oh, he's doing comedy? Well, how come nobody's been laughing? He must not be very good." When the reason no one's laughing is because nobody's fucking listening. Um,
Yeah.
but I just went to every single one that I could go to. And then I was like, guys, you should make more open mics so we can do more
Mm.
open mics. And nobody wanted to make more open mics. And they kind of people told me, hey, if you want to do it, why don't you make a show? And I'm like, because I don't want to. I don't want to do all the admin stuff. I just want to do the
Yeah.
art, which has been my thing always. Because I was studying music before that. I wrote 5 novels that I've never gotten published, mostly because every time it comes to doing the business aspect of it, I would just stop caring. Like, for me, it was like, I write a book, and then now you're supposed to be sending it to publishers or sending it to agents to look for publishers. But
Mm.
instead, I'd be like, but I have another cool book idea. Let me just do that
Yeah.
instead.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and never actually do the administrative stuff. But with comedy, you can't do the art form unless you have enough administrative stuff to make the shows happen in the first place. So finally, I was like, I guess I have to do that. And it was the first job or first art form that I was willing to like turn into a job on
Mm.
the actual, I'll do the admin stuff to warrant doing the other
Mhm.
stuff. So I started making my own shows in the city. And when I did that, then people started seeing, oh, this can work. I guess we'll do it too. Great idea we
Yeah.
had. And I'm like, yeah, we. Uh, so
Mhm.
I started doing that, and I got, I just did as many of the open mics as I could. And I did like all the shitty ones where people did not care. I've shown up in people's living rooms because they had an open mic in a living room, and I do those. And this is why I say, fortunately, I was able to I'm decently good at self-awareness to be like, okay, people kind of chuckled at that one, but is that really a laugh that's worth it? Should I stop there? Should I get rid of that completely and write something better? And I was
Mhm.
doing a lot of that to make the show at least like passable for an audience that's not used to comedy. Like, if I jumped into the New York
Mm.
scene, I'm sure it would have been dog shit. But I was able to grow a lot faster because I was able to get a lot of time on stage. Where if I was in the New York scene, you'd have to wait 2 hours to get a 3-minute spot in front of 4 comedians and one tourist who got just wandered into the wrong bar. Whereas here, every time there was a show, it was a real audience that you could gauge it with. Whether they engage or not, that's a different story. But after doing all that for a while, then I got an idea. Okay, this is how you can run a show, and this is how you can promote a show. And I
Mm.
started learning a little bit about how to use marketing tools, and
Mm.
just kind of learning all that as I go. Uh,
Yeah.
and then I was fortunate because at the beginning I was still studying. I was still in university doing
Mm.
my master's that I didn't really care about. I was I just needed the visa, so I was doing all my classes like as few as necessary to get my visa each year.
Okay.
But then in December of that year, so about 8 months into comedy, I had a family friend. My mom's friend brought me to Austria, basically. Like she didn't bring me here, but she said if she lived in Salzburg, and she said if I got accepted into an Austrian school, then she would help me out financially.
Okay.
For that time. So in December, at the beginning of the month, she died unexpectedly. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay rent. But it was the first month where I just happened to get $300 from comedy that month or in bookings ahead of time. And that's how much my rent cost because I lived in a student dorm. And I knew that I couldn't afford to renew my student visa because you have to show that you have 8 grand in the bank in order to do that. And on top of that, you have to pay $750 a semester. And I had no job and no income. And I didn't want to put a bunch of effort into trying to figure out how to get that student visa renewed to put me in the situation where every year I have to figure out how I can borrow 8 grand from now. Because she would just give me the money. I'd put it in my bank. We'd take a bank statement. I'd hand her the money back. We call it a day. But to ask that of like friends and acquaintances, even in like smaller amounts, is a big hassle and etc.
So you had to make the comedy a real business and to earn really your life with that. And
Exactly.
so you learned how to make a professional show and get a lot of people and buy tickets and make money, and you can really live from that. So that's
kind of. I mean, I was sorry to cut you off. I just to fully express that thought real quick. It wasn't like then I'd already learned enough. That was just like that was the first time that I'd made $300, and that's how much my rent was. And I saw an artist visa exists that might be easier to get than a student visa because the threshold of how much money you have to get is lower.
Okay.
And that's when I decided go all in on that. I had 4 months to figure it out, and like by the end of it, I was making $450 a month. But they let me have it because I was spending less than that on bills. And what I found out a year later when I went to renew my visa is that was not enough because they just didn't know how it worked at that place because nobody done it before. When I asked them, I was like, I want to switch my visa to an artist visa, drop out of school for it. They were confused. But the next year when I went back, they sent me to a different building, and that place knew all about it. And they were like, you need to make 957 euros and 46 cents a month. And I was like, I didn't make it last year, but I got my visa. They're like, yeah, you shouldn't have. So that's part of why don't look at me for like an example of what to aspire to, because I got lucky that the government just didn't know how to handle it. But after doing that, after getting my visa, now it's like my official thing. In the years that followed, that's when I started learning how to get more people to a show. It took a while before like there would be like a lot of people at a show. I say that because like you said, oh, now you know a lot of people. Because I think you saw me in Brussels, I assume.
Yeah, I saw you. Yeah.
So like Brussels, whenever I go there, it's usually like 1 or 2 very packed shows. So that could be misleading as to like what my shows were in Austria. But it'd be like maybe 20, 30 people. And kind of starting even lower than that. I think my first show had maybe 10 people, but I just kept doing that, and I learned how to market it with small amounts of money, and I also just lowered my standards of what I needed to survive. But the first year was really rough. The first year, I think the most I made any month was like $800, and that was like by December. And the first 6 months I made maybe 400 in the month, and that's what I had to live off of and produce shows off of. So it was like not just rent and food and everything else. It was that plus marketing expenses plus traveling expenses. I would have, if I wanted to go to Prague to do a show, I would have to borrow my rent money to buy a train ticket and hope I make the money back. But through doing all that, I learned more or less how to produce shows, at least on smaller scales, and slowly built up a competence doing that. Yeah.
Okay. And in Brussels, you go every time at the same bar, the James Joyce that's near from Schumann. Yeah. And because you have some kind of a deal with the owners of the bar, or I think you could make more maybe, but you
I do donation based. Yeah. For James Joyce, I always go back there because I really like the people at James Joyce.
Yeah.
I like the owners. The first time I did it, I was just looking for a venue, and somebody suggested them, I think, and I was like, "What's the deal?" Usually, I would charge ticket prices. Most of the places I go, I charge 10 to 15 euros per ticket.
Okay.
But James Joyce, they kind of said because we're happy to have you, but because of the way the layout is, we don't want to keep people from coming to the regular show, especially because they didn't know who I am. I just cold call people with emails or cold email people, and I'm just like, "Hey, I'm a comedian from the States, touring across Europe. I'm producing a show. You have a space. Can I use your space? I just need a microphone and the space for X amount of time. I'll handle all the marketing." So there's no risk for the venues, except for like we just gave them a space, and then like what deal they work out. Sometimes they want a flat fee for the room. Sometimes they want a percentage of the ticket sales. Sometimes they say you can have it for free. We take the drinks, you take the tickets. And then there's times like James Joyce where they say it has to be a free show. You can take donations. They give me some money from them to do the show. And then I can take donations. They take the drinks. And I was like, let's try it out because, again, they don't know who I am. You have to prove that you can do it in the first place. And then after the first show was successful, they were really cool people, and the donations were quite nice. Like, I think the last time I went there, I don't know if it was no, it was 2 times ago, because the last time I went there was right before coronavirus, and it was still fine. But like the time before that, I made like $1,000 in donations. So it's like the money is still nice because the audience is like people have money in Belgium. So like if they were like, oh, I would have spent $5 to go to the theater, $10 to go to the theater. A lot of people, that translates over to like, oh, this person flew from out of the country to give us this show that we enjoyed for an hour. Of course, I'll give them a donation. But you can't pull that in every place. Like when I go to Riga in Latvia, it's not that. It's
Not the same,
it's just
not
as
the same
packed,
level of
shitty
life.
show. But also not the same level of willingness to give. Which is partially related to level of life, but it's also not it's not commensurate with how much things cost. Because if I go to get a burger in Riga, it was not cheap. But I would do a show, and like I did a show, let's say it was about as packed as James Joyce 2-pack shows, and I made total $300. And that's because 1/3 of the audience, when they walked past me at the door, I was like, would you like to make a donation? And a good show, people enjoyed it. It wasn't like if I did badly and people don't want to donate, of course. But like a good show, everybody's having fun. And then 1/3 of the people, as they walk by, I'm like, would you like to make a donation? And they say, no, thank you, and walk out. As if like I was giving them an offer of like, would you like to give me money? No, thanks for the offer, but no. And I had somebody in Riga, sorry, it's a tangent, but it just annoys me so much because there was a woman in Riga once. She loved the show, and then afterwards she's like, she's like, hey, can I have one of your cards? Because it has all your social media information. I'd love to see more. And I was like, sure, here you go. Would you like to make a donation? And she's like, no, thanks. And then she had the audacity to look back up at me and say, hey, why do you do your shows for free? And I said, I don't. It's donation based. And most people aren't rude enough to say no to my face after they ask me for something after I give them a show that I flew in the country for. And she said, oh, okay, and then walked away. Oh, infuriating. But like, so like there are places that I won't go back to Riga for a donation-based show because that's happened twice with 4 shows, and it's just not worth it. Brussels is great though. That's why I keep going with James Joyce. Is the people at James Joyce are nice, and the audience is willing enough to pay for what they enjoy.
And Brussels is very multicultural, and especially there from in the European neighborhood near Schumann, the James Joyce, because there are all the European Commission and Parliament, and so you have all nationalities, and that's great too. And so I think now maybe you are on TikTok, and I saw that you have almost 100,000 followers, so that's enormous. So you are maybe you are on another step, so you have a real audience, very important, so maybe you can in the future organize big show, I know, with a great big stage, and like a concert or something. Because James Joyce is cool, but it's kind of small. I mean, you have 100,000 followers, you can maybe in the future make bigger. Do you want to do that? Have you goals or ambition or success? You want to grow, or you are happy with now with the things like they have the now? I don't know.
I mean, obviously not happy with them now because we haven't, been allowed to leave our fucking houses in 4 months. But,
Yeah.
and I would say my biggest issue with where I was at before the lockdown is that it didn't put me that many months of no work away from a problem, like if there was no government funding, which fortunately there is, but if there had been no government funding through the pandemic, I did not have nearly enough money to make it a year. And
Okay.
that's a thing for me is like, I want to grow enough to where like, if this happened again, I would be
Yeah.
fine, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
And step one to that is, yes, I would like to grow. As far as TikTok goes, yes, those numbers look much nicer than they are. There was a good like 4 month arc of like, as I went from 0 to 98.7 thousand followers, that I was like, cool, things are going well. But
Yeah.
and I'm not sure exactly what the issue was. I know that about half my audience on TikTok is in the States. And I noticed that when Trump said that he was going to ban TikTok, like when he made that first announcement, immediately all my views stopped happening, like in big numbers. Like it got much smaller immediately, even though he didn't actually ban it. But I think people worried. I also have a feeling part of it is because a lot of people, like adults who'd never used TikTok before, during the first lockdown were like, what's this Tic-Tac? Let's try it out. And then they get on there and they see a bunch of little kids dancing and doing the whoa. And then they see an adult doing stand-up comedy and they're like, oh, cool, I'll follow that. But then after 3 months on TikTok, they're like, I'm bored of this app and I got to go back to work now. And then they just stop using the app and then just never come back on. Like when the next lockdown comes, they find other things that aren't TikTok. So I feel like a lot of those accounts probably never see what I do. And then I think there's also a fact of like, I had one video blow up that was about like the superheroes, kind of like it was a joke about Black Panther being the first Black superhero whose power isn't electricity. And that got like a lot of views. I mean, maybe 600,000. I have ones that are bigger, but that one got like a lot of interaction and a lot of new followers from it. And I have a feeling that because it changed my demographic, because my demographic from the time I started doing comedy and running ads to now, or to this point, it had always been mostly women aged 25 to 34 is like my biggest demographic of people who are interested. After that is men the same age. After that is women 18 to 24. And my TikTok was like 30% men, and then the rest were women, until I posted that video about superheroes, and then it became 50-50. And what I think is thousands and thousands of men or boys who like superheroes subscribed because they're like, superhero guy. And then I never did another joke about superheroes, and they're like, this isn't what I signed up for. So then every time the video comes up, they don't care. And TikTok's like, oh, people don't care, and just stop showing my videos to people. So like my TikTok since August has like been on a thing where it's still at 98,000, but every video I post gets like a couple thousand views. It's not much anymore. So it's hard for me to actually get excited and look at that as the good tool for growth. But I think it was good to have, and it's certainly validating if I need to show the government, oh, am I a real artist? Here's this video with 2 million views. It helps things out to do that, but it's not my main idea of how I'm going to grow to a better point. But what I would certainly like is to grow. Do I want it to be like, do I expect to be like a Kevin Hart level comedian? No. I also don't really want that level of fame, but what I do want is I tour so much. I work so hard, which I've always taken pride in, but what I'm realizing is like I do it to a very unhealthy degree. So March in 2019, I did 20 cities in just March, and that's too much, because it's not just me going to 20 cities. It's me calling the venues, setting it up, running all the ads myself, showing up in the city, setting up the room myself, handing out all the tickets, doing the show, handing out cards, selling merchandise, putting everything back, going to the hotel, go to the next city tomorrow to do the
And you have a team, or you're alone?
No, just me. Just
and
me.
But you have a girlfriend who go with you or something?
No,
Or you're really
I had a girlfriend for those shows, but like for the most part, she wouldn't come with me because then it eats so much of the extra cost to have an extra plane ticket to every location, an
no,
extra
yeah.
hotel room for every location. So it was just be me going and doing all of that for 20 cities in 1 month, and I would work myself up into the point where I would just have panic attacks every time I go outside. So what I want for my goal for the future, and what TikTok, for the brief moment that it looked like it was a possibility, made me realize is I don't want to have to keep going out on tour 20 cities every month. I would much rather go maybe 10 cities every month with twice the number of people in the audience, or maybe even
Yeah.
5 shows each month with like 4 times the number of people in the audience, and I can make the same amount of money for significantly less work. And then if I want to do more shows, then it's worth even more. So it kind of taught me that what I want is to figure out ways and strategies that I can get bigger audiences into the same spaces, so that I don't have, because like what I do is I go to 10 cities, 20 cities, because that way if one of them or two of them or three of them don't go well, other ones will make up for it. But if I can just ensure that each one goes well, then I can, not have panic attacks. So that's kind of my goal. The means of doing that is the question, and what's the
Yeah, but
best
you,
way.
you don't want
But
to be a famous comedian, but you want to earn your life correctly. I mean that.
yes and no. I mean, I want to be like known enough to be respected, but I don't want to be
Yeah.
like a Kevin Hart level of fame is intrusive. And even
Yeah.
like much smaller levels of fame are intrusive. And what I've realized, especially from TikTok, because I don't have money from TikTok because the lockdowns were happening. So I had people asking me like, when are you coming on tour? When are you coming on tour? And the answer was like, yeah, I can't leave the fucking city right now because sorry if I'm not supposed to swear. I just realized I am. But I can't leave the city during the lockdown. So like the times that people were most interested in seeing a live show of me, I couldn't capitalize on it. I did sell some tickets in Vienna from people who are interested in that, but like, it's maybe 20 tickets that I've sold as a result of 100,000 followers on TikTok. However, because my ex and I broke up in September, and the times that I've like tried, like, let me just see what Tinder's like, even though it's pointless to go on it because we can't meet up in person because we're in a lockdown, but just for doing something, let me swipe and see, talk to people. And I've had way more matches than I ever have in the past whenever I've had Tinder. And most of the people who match, I've had more people message me first as well.
Okay.
But also a large percentage of them, when they message me first, it's to tell me that they recognize me from TikTok. And
Okay.
they're like, oh, you're the guy from TikTok. And it's so frustrating because what I've realized is like 100,000 followers on TikTok, as much as that's a big number for like actual numbers, as far as like TikTok numbers go, it's so insignificant. Like they're not making a social blade for me to keep track of like, oh, what's this influencer doing? Brands aren't hitting me up for deals. TikTok, that's such a small number for influence because TikTok has like gigantic numbers for everything. So like my level of fame is not real fame, but it's still enough to where like if I'm on Tinder now, I
Yeah,
can't
you're.
know it's like I'm a public figure and I'm getting people to react to me like I'm a public figure, but I have no money to show for it. So that's because like you always see somebody on TV like Kevin Hart and you're like, oh, he's famous, and it's intrusive, but at least he has all that money and that's the trade-off. But what you start to realize is like, oh, you get fame faster than you get money. So you just get all the inconveniences of being well known without, and I'm fucking broke, because I haven't been able to work in a year. So that's to me is like, oh, if I do get famous or like if I got to where it was like 1 million subscribers on YouTube, which is, is a big reach. But like if I did get to that, I would really want to have everything, like all my friend circle very well established, a partner that I'd hopefully be married to, maybe have a kid, so that you can really like you can be like, okay, that was YouTube in my public persona, but now I'm going to turn around and focus on my family that's actually important to me. And have that to hold on to, because I think the idea of being single and looking for something meaningful while being very famous, I think that makes everything so difficult because you just don't know, is this person interested in me just because they're interested in me, or is it because I'm a public figure, or is it a mixture of both? But even when it's a mixture of both, it's just not even footing, where like we walk into the interaction, and I guess here's the example I use. if I'm at a library or a bookstore and I'm like looking for books and I happen to meet somebody and we start talking and it's like a fun little thing, like, oh, this is a fun conversation. Why don't you just grab a coffee real quick? And you sit down, you have the coffee, talk for like a half hour, exchange numbers. Oh, what a fun coincidence. Life is beautiful, and these fun little coincidences is the way I would look at it. But for all I know, she could be like, holy shit, that's that person from TikTok. Okay, I'm not going to be a fangirl because I don't want to be weird. But that's the reason she talked to me in the first place. And if that happens, it's just such a different way of going into the situation where, like, I think it's just chance. She knows who I am. It's an imbalance that I don't want in my life. And I can already see how it's like with 100,000 followers on TikTok, which is 0 level fame. It's already frustrating. So it definitely made me reconsider: do I want to be famous? And I'd rather have like money and like know that when I go sell out a show, I can sell out a show. But then, like, if I walk 3 blocks from that show, nobody recognizes me. That'd be pretty dope.
Yeah, I understand. And yeah, I have a question. What's your best experience on stage and also your worst experience? Maybe it's more interesting your worst, because I think the best, you do it right, well. So um, almost every time, I mean, this is successful, but maybe sometime you have um, um, an experience on stage and that doesn't go well, or I don't know, and maybe some drunk people or something. It was difficult to handle. I don't know
Yeah, I mean,
if you
I'll
want to
say,
talk about.
as far as a show's going well, like, it's not like every time they go well. When I tour, most of them go well, or else I would reconsider touring. If like most of my shows didn't go well, I'd be like, okay, this is me. But yeah, we are kind of genetically wired to be like, pay attention to the bad things, and when a good thing happens, you're like, oh yeah, that's what's supposed to happen, and you just don't make a big deal out of it. But I guess if I'm looking at it like from less from experiential, but just from what I know is good, I would say the best things are like every time I go to Stuttgart, it's been a really fun show. I've done like, and like also like every time I go to Stuttgart, I sell out the show. Who knows if this will happen again in the future, because the venue that I went hasn't even been allowed to open for the last year. So who knows if they'll even be a business? Who knows the world in a year? But everything back then, I've always sold out the show, and it's been really packed, and it's always been very fun. So that's like a generally fun experience for me. And then I would say, I did a festival in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, and it was about 800 people in the audience, and I had to go on last out of like, I think 6 comedians, and the person who went on right before me had a Netflix half hour that was coming out that week, and I had to go on right after her, and I did very well. Like, and so I felt it, to me, it was very gratifying, one, to be put as the not that I think they were like, and Reggie's the headliner because he's worth it, but like they did have to trust me enough to put me at the very end of a list of comedians who are all, you know, good. And then that I could actually go up and close immediately following somebody with a Netflix special and still hold my own and get a lot of laughs and have a good experience. To me, that was very gratifying. As like, okay, I think that's like, you have a tendency in Europe in general as an English speaking comedian to think, okay, I'm doing well, but is that only because people don't know better? Is it because people don't have anything to compare it to? Maybe I'm horrible compared to every comedian in the States, but there aren't any options here, so that's the only reason people think I'm good. So every time somebody like established from the States comes over and I get to interact with them, it's always good to be like, oh, I am good at this, and like have them be like, oh, like I've had like a regular at the Comedy Store, which is like being a paid regular at the Comedy Store in LA is like one of the biggest comedy like badges that you can have in the States. And I've had a regular from there tell me like she's like, you're a good comedian, like you're very good. And it's just like, oh, that means a lot. So like I would say holding my own not against, but like alongside a comedian from Netflix for a European audience was very, very gratifying. As far as bad shows, there have been a bunch. And I would say one of the worst, it was in Budapest. And I guess it was like a series of bad shows that happened all back to back. So I did a show regularly for a hostel in Vienna, like before the lockdowns, for like 2 or 3 years. I did it like once or twice a month, or once a week, or once every 2 weeks, depending on the time frame. And it would just be like a surprise show for the audience. It would be they didn't pay anything. It was just anybody who was at the hostel when they come down to the bar, they could watch this show. But since most of them didn't know the show was going to happen, they're just coming down to the bar to talk to people they met in their room. And then 10 minutes into their conversation, I get on stage and I'm like, shut up, listen to me for an hour. And they're like, who are you? What's happening? We wanted to talk. And so I've had fun shows there, but most likely than not, it's always hard. And that's one of the things that made me a better comedian, is like learning how to make people care in a situation where nobody cares. But I've had some really horrible experiences there. And I had one night that was particularly bad. It was a nightmare. And then the next day I had to go to Budapest to do a show there. And I did a show, and it was a donation-based show. It was my first time producing my own show in Vienna, or in Budapest. And it was donation-based, and there were fewer people in the audience than I was hoping for. It was still, in retrospect, it was fine. It was fine, and I should have appreciated it. It wasn't a blowout show, but like, because the night before had been so bad, I just felt like I needed a really good show to make up for it, and it wasn't a really good show. And then the next day, I had a day off, but a comedian from Budapest had come to my first show, and he's like, "Oh, you were really great. We're doing an open mic tomorrow if you want to come join." So I was like, "Okay, sure, I'll stop by." I did a set. It went pretty well. And at the end, they're like, "Hey, we have extra time. Do you want to come back up and do another set?" And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then I kind of gave to the audience, I'm like, I have one of two stories I can tell. Tell me which story you want. And they told me the story. I did it, and they hated it. And also, like, there was no microphone, so I just had to like talk loudly, and then it was so much, it was so noisy, it was horrible. It was horrible, and it was one of those things where I'm like, why did I go back up? I could have just let it be okay. And then on the third night in Budapest, I had to the hostel that I did it for in Vienna owns a hostel in Budapest, and they said, if you do a show with us on the third night, then you can stay at our place in a private room for 3 nights. So I was like, cool, I guess I'm doing that. And it was one of the worst shows I've done ever, because when I showed up to the hostel, they were like, "Hi, can I help you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm the comedian, so I have a room." And they're like, "Oh, there's going to be a comedy show." Meanwhile, there's a poster with my face on it right behind me. Like, which means the receptionist sitting at this desk is staring forward at a picture of me all day that says comedy show, and they have no idea that it's happening. So on the day that it actually happens, like, I go down to the bar to set stuff up, and there's like maybe 20 people in the room, and I was like, cool, that's a good sign. And then I go back upstairs for like a half hour, and I come back down, and all of those people are gone. And they've moved over to the other side where there's like a half wall, and there's like a pool table and a foosball table, but it's open air for the top, so all the sound comes in, but they can't see or experience any of it. And when I come back, there are 10 people in the room, and they are spread out literally as far as they could possibly be. Like, it's a long rectangular room, and it's somebody on the far wall this way, somebody over here. So I have to literally turn 180 degrees to go see all the people involved. And none of them, they won't move together. They refuse to do that. So I just start going, and there's a girl who's maybe 1.5 meters away from me at one of the tables, like right in front of me. And it's 2 girls at the table, and one of them is just on her phone the entire time. And I'm like a few minutes into the set, and I was just like, wow, you're not gonna look up from that phone at all, are you? And without looking up, she said, nope, and keeps texting. And then I was like in the middle of another joke, and then there were 2 girls who were like sitting right next to me here, and they just start interrupting to be like, actually, that's not true. In Denmark, we're blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what's happening here? And in the first 15 minutes, 7 people walked out, and of the 10. And because the room was so long and narrow, they all had to walk out within like 1 meter of me. Like, they had to get really close to me to walk out like that. And I knew I had to keep going for an hour because I'd already stayed in the hostel for the 3 nights, and I promised them I would give them an hour-long show. So yeah, I just had to keep doing that. And at a certain point, it was just 3 people left, and I just sat down on top of a table and talked to them into a microphone until a few more people happened to walk in, and it was ended with like 5 people. And I stood back up, and at least those 5 people cared. But it was awful, especially because like the whole week leading up to it had been like just shit show after shit show. To end with that was, I wanted to blow my brains out, because then also the next day when I woke up and went to breakfast, I had to eat breakfast with all the people who walked out of my show the night before.
And when it happens, you see people do that, and you continue to make the show. You find the strength in you to things to continue. That's great, because sometimes it could be so uh, disturbing that you could totally lose your I mean you could fall down, but you keep going. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, there are also times when, like, if I could have, I would have just been like 15 minutes in. Hey guys, it's clear that nobody wants this. Can I stop? And then hope they say yes. I didn't do it because, like, again, I felt like I've taken their side of the deal already, and it's not even like if it was day one, I could be like, I'm stopping. And if they
Yeah.
charge me for the room, then they charge me for the room. But on day
Yeah.
three is like I've already taken the room. I have to at least give them what I said I would give them. So it's like, as far as like holding up like contractual obligations, I didn't sign a contract, but like, agreements.
Yeah.
Sure, I think it's important to follow through on agreements. But as far as like the artistic integrity and the strength of like, but you did it anyway. Fuck that.
Yeah.
In this response, there are times when it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
It's happened like twice in my career that I've been like, and always it shows that nobody paid me, like, where I'm like, fuck this, I'm getting off stage, because I've always thought like, you're not going to scare me off stage, because if I start getting off stage when the show goes badly, then that just sets up a precedent in my mind where that's an acceptable thing to do if it's not going my way, and you do need to sit there and like learn how to like handle it. And eventually you'll get better at turning the room around, like, oh, they hate me, but by the end of it, they're kind of digging it. But I had one time where a guy just started interrupting, a guy who like was supposed to be performing that night later on, but just decided to heckle me the whole time and mock me, and like he's like, this is Austria, blah blah blah, and just kept going. And I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like, and I got mad. I got really mad, and I was 2 minutes into my set, and I was like, no, I'm done. And I put the microphone down and walked off, because like, and it was like this freeing feeling to be like, oh yeah, I don't have to fucking do this. Like, if you're gonna ruin this, I'm not gonna sit here and be miserable for the next 10 minutes. I got another show I can go to right now. And I think there is something to be said for that. You just can't have that be your default mode. But there are times when it's like, this is not worth it. And the sense of pride that you get from like, at least I did it, at a certain point is intangible. And there are times when pride can get in the way of the truth, I guess, is kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I understand. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say something more, or you want to share something. For the idea of my podcast is to encourage people who wants to make comedy to do it. And so I don't know if you want to say something, a message for young people, or maybe not young people, but they always know they want to be an actor or a comedian, and they want to make laugh, but they hesitate, or they are not being ready. And what do you want to say to them?
I will say, if you want to do it, go for it, but with an asterisk. And I would say that if you're going to do it, go for it, but also understand that it's probably never going to be your career, and that's fine. And you'll probably enjoy it more if you don't want it to be your career, because all the things that were fun about it went away once I need the paycheck. So if you're going to do it, just do it, make it a hobby. And if you enjoy it and you start making money off of it, then think about how you can slowly start making enough money to like, you have enough money before you switch over and get rid of your day job. Don't look for ways to exit your day job. Just enjoy it for the fun that it is and the party that it can be, and hanging out with friends in the social event. Because one, it's going to take you a while to be good enough to deserve money. Again, yes, it happened quite quickly for me, because I was kind of thrown into a situation and fortunately managed to do it. But like, most people wouldn't have succeeded in the way that I did while once you get thrown into the sink or swim. Like, people always like say sink or swim, and that's the way you do it. No plan B, because you have to make it work. But there's a survivor bias there, because the only people telling you that are the people who did sink or swim and managed to swim. But way more people sink, and a lot of the times it's not because of them. Like, I could say I succeeded because of me, but I don't think that's true. I got lucky in a number of ways. I got lucky that I was in a city where there were enough other comedians that were okay enough to where, like, if I wanted to do a show when I was first starting off, I could book 4 people who made the show like okay. But if I was in a city where there was nobody else and I was the only person doing it, it wouldn't have been as easy. Or if I were in a city where there were fewer expats because I live in a multicultural city, or if I were in a city, in a country where the government knew how my visa worked. Like if I just went to a different building the first time I applied for my visa, they would have deported me because I didn't succeed in meeting the qualifications. That department just, they didn't communicate with each other enough for that person to know what they were supposed to have me do. So I got lucky there. Like there are all these things that make you get very lucky. And then once it all happened, now I'm not legally allowed to have a day job. And that's made things a lot harder. And because like, if you have a regular job and you want to like go on a tour, you can finance that tour with your regular job. And if you don't make money on the tour, fine. But like, if you have to borrow your rent money to go on the tour, one, you're going to go on you're going to do fewer shows because you can't take as many risks. You're not going to go as far like geographically because you can't take as many risks. And then once you go there, it's so easy to get it stuck in your mind of how much money am I making tonight? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, cool. I broke even now. If anybody else comes, okay, cool. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I can eat this week. It takes so much of the fun out of it, and it makes so much of it transactional. And you will lose that the moment. Hopefully, you'll find it again. But the moment you need the money, and that's the only way that you can pay your bills, it takes out so much of the fun. And I go to shows all the time, like open mics, all the time when the lockdown isn't happening, where I'm around all these comedians who, for them, this is just fun. And it's their time to be social and see their friends and be the funny guy. And they look at me and they're like trying to interact with me on that level. And I'm like, I'm just in such a different headspace right now. And I'm sure they're enjoying themselves more than I am. So go for it. But like, don't try to make it your career until it makes sense that it's going to be, and be fine with the fact that it's not a career, because honestly, if you just want to have fun, you're going to have a lot more fun if you're just having it as a hobby than if you're making it as a career. And there are a lot of downsides to the job that you don't see. It's like you just see Kevin Hart on stage and you're like, whoa, that's the job I want. But what you don't see is the 50 to 100 hours worth of administrative tasks, business skills, doing the paperwork, getting licenses, finding a venue, checking your booking, filing for an LLC. You don't see any of those things, and that's much more necessary to make it a job than the jokes. The jokes are almost secondary at a certain point. Like you have to have them; they have to be good, but like that is not the most important part of a career. Is the jokes is one of the least important parts of making it a successful business.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with you. Me, I just do that as a hobby. So I have a job for money, but that's not a funny job. I mean, it's in accountants. It's very boring. But yeah, I do stand up just for because it's my passion, and I want to spend more time on it and less time on the accountant part. But yeah, it's important to have money in life. I mean, people who tell you, yeah, you have to know plan B. I mean, yeah, okay, but yeah, you need money to live, and if you have kids and stuff, and it's part of life. So I think you're right, but that's cool that you managed to do that, and maybe you tell that you're lucky, but you are also very talented. So you are a self-made man, self-made comedian, and you're really great. And I wish you that you have a more and more success, because you have already a lot. But yeah, I wish you the best, and I thank you very much for participate to this podcast, and I apologize again for my bad way to tell things in English. Sorry.
No, again, that's
But
no problem. I know better than to fault people for their language skills when they're already going out of their way to accommodate my language in the first place. I would like to say something, if I may. One, sorry if I've gone on a bunch of random tangents tonight, and I don't know if this is good. Hopefully, it's been what you're looking for in a podcast. But I will say, for what it's worth, if anybody's interested, if you want to follow me on my social media platforms,
of course.
It's the Reginald Bärris on all the major platforms. So TikTok, Patreon, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. If anybody's interested, I'm doing online shows on Patreon or on in general, and Patreon members can help finance the projects, and they get free tickets to all the online shows if they join the Patreon / the Reginald Bärris. But if you want to, if you don't want to do any of that, I am working right now on writing a book that's all focused on how to turn your art or your passion or whatever into a career without having to get 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 followers on a platform. Because I had to learn like very much from like here, how can I take $30 and make it into a show? And I think that people get very jaded by it has to be the top level. It has to be Kevin Hart. It has to be Logan Paul if you're going to be on YouTube. And I think people lose the fact of like, you don't actually need that much of a social media following to make a career. Again, it's not for everybody. I think a big fault that people do is they act like everybody can and should be an entrepreneur, when for a lot of people's personalities, it doesn't make sense, and it's not offering security, and it's a lot of self-direction. But if anybody's interested, I will eventually be releasing a book that I'm writing about my experiences in how to make, turn your thing into a sustainable career with advice that I have from that. If anybody's interested, it'll be, a while before it comes out, but follow me on social media, and I'm posting stuff, funny stuff until then.
Okay, so when the book is ready, you will post it on your social, and we can buy it. Okay, great. And I will mention your website and in the description of the video, so people who hear the podcast can click on the link and go directly on.
Thanks.
So thank you again, and see you later.
Bye.